On the top of a forgotten mountain, an old man keeps a promise he made to the woman he loved. Each step towards the summit is a duel with his past, a challenge against time. But at the peak, something more than memories awaits. What will he find at the end of his journey? Arturo wakes up startled. During the night, he dreamt of Marta for the first time in years, and the intensity of the memory left him breathless. He saw her smiling, dressed in her winter coat, pointing toward the horizon from the top of a seemingly endless mountain. When his breathing steadies, he turns his head to the empty side of the bed. The space where she used to sleep now holds only silence. In the small coastal town, Arturo's routine has become both his refuge and his prison. He sits each morning by the window, watching the waves come and go, while the wind stirs the curtains as if to remind him that time keeps moving. On the table in front of him, the notebook he and Marta filled over decades rests like a reliquary. Every New Year's, they wrote their dreams in it. Now, its pages are filled with crossed-out memories or notes with worn edges, except for one: travel to Monte Esperanza. On the last page, the words are underlined in red ink, like a challenge they never quite dared to accept. The place where we would say our goodbyes, Arturo murmurs, tracing the letters with trembling fingers. For years, that promise remained suspended in the air, buried beneath excuses and illnesses that prevented them from embarking on the journey. The sound of the church bells interrupts his thoughts. He stands, picks up the notebook, and carries it to the small desk by the fireplace. As he opens it once more, something catches his eye. There is a note he hadn't seen before, written in Marta's slanted handwriting. Arturo, if you reach Monte Esperanza without me, you will know what it means to live fully. The phrase hits him like lightning. His heart pounds, and the monotony that had enveloped him suddenly seems to shatter. Arturo stands motionless, staring at those words that now seem to hold an urgent meaning, as if Marta were speaking to him directly from the past. Outside, seagulls cry and the wind blows fiercely, carrying away the echo of a thought he can no longer ignore. Monte Esperanza is waiting for him. New Year's Eve arrived with an icy air that swept through the streets of the coastal town, dragging with it the dry leaves of a forgotten autumn. Arturo, locked inside his house, barely noticed the cold. His world was centered on the notebook lying open on the table. He had spent hours flipping through it, as if Marta's words could bring back the warmth of her presence. But that night, one of the pages caught his attention in a special way. Among the worn pages, a fold in the paper revealed something he had never noticed. His trembling fingers carefully unfolded it, and there, hidden for years, appeared a small note. He immediately recognized Marta's handwriting, slanted, firm, with that style that always reminded him of her determination. The words written in blue ink seemed to shine under the dim glow of the lamp. Arturo, if you reach Monte Esperanza without me, you will know what it means to live fully. The air seemed to freeze in his lungs. Arturo read the note over and over, as if he couldn't fully comprehend what he was seeing. It was her handwriting, her voice, her challenge. How had he not seen this note before? Why now? Questions swirled in his mind, but none had answers. All he could feel was a deep longing, a spark that made him rise from his chair. He spent the rest of the night with his eyes fixed on the window, remembering the stories Marta used to tell him about Monte Esperanza, her favorite place since childhood. It had been their shared dream, the final journey they always postponed. Now, without her, it seemed impossible. But as he listened to the pealing of the bells announcing the new year, Arturo knew he had to try. When he shared his decision with his children the next day, their faces filled with concern. "Dad, you can't do that. You can barely walk to the store. It's crazy," said Elena, the eldest, her voice a mix of love and desperation. "Stay here. We can take care of you. Marta wouldn't want you to risk yourself like this." Arturo didn't respond immediately. He simply placed the notebook on the table in front of them and pointed to the note. "This is what she wanted, and I promised her we wouldn't leave anything unfinished." His younger son, Diego, tried to reason with logic. "Dad, you're not in shape to make a trip like that. If you insist, you might not come back." Arturo smiled softly, but his eyes reflected a determination they hadn't seen in years. "It's what I want, and if I don't come back, at least I'll know I tried." That night, as the family shared a quiet dinner, Arturo began to pack a small backpack. Each item he added was a renewed promise, a declaration that despite the uncertain path, he had to try. Marta's words kept resonating in his mind. "You will know what it means to live fully." The day dawned gray, with the wind shaking the tree branches, but Arturo wasn't deterred. After deciding to embark on the journey, the next step was clear: find help. He knew that, at his age, he couldn't make the journey alone. His mind soon turned to Sebastian, the young neighbor who always lent him a hand with a smile. Sebastian arrived mid-morning, carrying a couple of tools to fix a fence Arturo had neglected. "Good morning, Mr. Arturo. How are you today?" he greeted cheerfully. Arturo, without preamble, got straight to the point. "I need you to accompany me to Monte Esperanza," he said, looking directly at the young man. Sebastian's smile faded for a moment, confused by the seriousness of the request. "To Monte Esperanza. Are you sure?" "It's a tough journey, Mr. Arturo," he replied, concerned but unwilling to quash the enthusiasm shining in the old man's eyes. Arturo nodded. "It's not a matter of whether I'm sure. It's something I must do. Marta left me one last promise, and I can't ignore it." Sebastian remained silent, weighing the situation. He knew the old man well enough to realize that he wouldn't change his mind. Finally, he smiled with a mix of admiration and determination. "All right, I'll do it. But only on one condition. You'll listen to me at all times, and if something seems dangerous, we turn back." Arturo agreed immediately, and they began to plan. As they went over what they needed, Arturo remembered something. He walked to the small desk in the living room and took out a box filled with old papers. Marta always said we'd do it together someday. That's why she made this. From the box, he pulled out a hand-drawn map with crooked but precise lines. There were small symbols in the corners and notes in the margins. Here we must stop to admire the view, or beware of loose rocks on this stretch. Sebastian carefully took it, examining it with curiosity. It's like she left us a personal guide, he said with a smile. The next day, with light backpacks and provisions for the journey, Arturo and Sebastian began the first stage of the trip. Fresh air filled Arturo's lungs, and each step seemed to release something inside him that had been trapped for years. Sebastian, always attentive, set the pace, making sure Arturo didn't overexert himself. While resting under a tree, Sebastian shared something he had never told before. "You know, Mr. Arturo, my mom used to take me camping when I was a kid. She always said that being in nature reminded us of how small we are and how big our dreams can be. When she passed away, I stopped doing those things. Until today. Thank you for giving me a reason to try again." Arturo listened silently, feeling an unexpected connection. Both carried the weight of loss, but also the hope of finding something beyond their pain. As the sun began to set, they illuminated their steps with stories, sharing moments that made the journey not just a physical path, but an emotional one. That night, camping under the stars, Arturo pulled out the map once more. He touched Marta's notes and felt as though she were there with them. "Sebastian," he said, looking at the sky. "Marta was right. This isn't just a journey. It's a beginning." Sebastian nodded, realizing that what they had started together was already transforming something within them both. The day of the true beginning arrived with a clear sky and fresh air that promised good weather for the journey. Arturo and Sebastian checked their backpacks one last time before setting out. The young man ensured they had enough water and food, while Arturo, with careful hands, tucked Marta's notebook into an inner pocket of his coat. Although he didn't say it aloud, he felt that notebook was more important than anything else they carried. The first stage of the journey was calm. The lower trails of Monte Esperanza were surrounded by open fields and fruit trees. Arturo, though slow, advanced with a determination that inspired Sebastian. Every so often he would stop to point out a tree or a stream. "Here, Marta and I once stopped for a picnic. She insisted on sitting on that rock because she said it had the best view of the valley," he recounted with a nostalgic smile. Sebastian listened attentively, asking details about his travels. Arturo's memories flowed like a gentle river, and with each anecdote he seemed to rejuvenate. But soon the path began to change. The trail grew steeper, with loose rocks and roots jutting out from the ground. The sun, which had been kind in the morning, began to heat up intensely. On one of those difficult stretches, Arturo stumbled on an unstable rock. Sebastian reacted quickly, catching him before he could fully fall, but the impact was enough to make the old man drop his backpack. The fall wasn't serious, but when they retrieved the backpack, they realized the map was gone. Sebastian searched around, moving branches and rocks, but the map was nowhere to be found. Arturo sat on a nearby rock, his shoulders slumped. "Without the map, we're lost," he murmured, lightly tapping the ground with his walking stick. Sebastian, however, wasn't ready to give up. He sat next to Arturo and pulled a notebook from the old man's pocket. "Mr. Arturo, Marta left us more than a map. Look, there are notes here, directions. She knew this day would come and left us everything we needed to find the way. Arturo took the notebook with trembling hands. Marta's words, written in the handwriting he loved so much, seemed more alive than ever. Among the pages he found phrases like, "When the trail splits, follow the sound of water," and "Look for the tree with the twisted branch. It's the halfway point." Encouraged by Sebastian's determination, Arturo stood up. "You're right. Marta always knew how to guide us, even when we weren't prepared." Using the notes in the notebook as their guide, they continued on their way. The ascent was slow, but each step felt like a small victory. When they finally reached a clearing where sunlight filtered through the trees, Arturo paused to take a deep breath. "Marta always said the most valuable things aren't found on easy paths," he remarked, gazing at the horizon. Sebastian smiled. "And it seems she was right. Let's keep going. We still have a long way to go." As the sun began to set, they both felt more connected than ever to the mission that drove them. Though the path had changed, Marta's spirit continued to guide them, and with each step, Arturo felt he was not only getting closer to the summit, but also to the promise he had made to the woman who still accompanied him in his memories. The sky began to darken without warning. What had been a sunny and calm day transformed within minutes into a sky covered with threatening clouds. Arturo and Sebastian, midway through a steep section, heard the first rumble of thunder echo across the mountain, vibrating in the air. The wind began to blow fiercely, kicking up dust and leaves as the first heavy raindrops fell. "We need to find shelter," Sebastian said, urgently, looking around. There wasn't a tree sturdy enough to protect them, but a few meters ahead he spotted what looked like the entrance to a cave. "There, quickly." Arturo, panting from the effort, could barely stay on his feet as Sebastian guided him toward the dark opening. They entered just as the rain began to fall furiously, pounding the rocks and forming small streams that ran down the trail they had just left behind. Inside the cave, the darkness was dense, but their eyes soon adjusted. The place had a cold, damp air, but it protected them from the storm raging outside. Sebastian turned on a flashlight he carried in his backpack, projecting a beam of light onto the stone walls. Arturo, leaning to rest, felt something strange under his hand. When they brought the light closer, both fell silent. Carved into the rock were the words, "Where there is love, there is strength." The letters, though worn by years, were clearly visible. Arturo ran his fingers over the inscription as if to make sure it was real. His voice broke as he spoke. "Marta and I were here. We carved it together many years ago. It was our way of remembering that we could overcome anything as long as we were together." Sebastian said nothing, but his eyes reflected the respect and admiration he felt for the old man. Arturo, moved by the memory, felt a new strength awaken within him. Marta had been with him every step of the way, and this inscription was further proof that her love had never left him. When the storm subsided, the two resumed their journey. However, the next day brought another challenge. The trail led them to a river, which, due to the torrential rain from the previous night, was overflowing and roaring with a violent current. The stones that normally served as a crossing were now submerged, and the river's force seemed daunting. Sebastian analyzed the situation, searching for a safe way to cross, but Arturo interrupted him. "I can't do it. This is too much. If we try to cross and something goes wrong?" His voice trailed off, filled with doubt and exhaustion. Sebastian knelt beside him, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. "Mr. Arturo, look back. Look at everything we've already overcome. You've come farther than anyone would have thought possible. We can't stop now." Arturo looked at the river and then at the notebook in his hands. Among Marta's notes, he found a phrase that seemed written for this very moment. "When the path is uncertain, remember that love was always our compass." Inspired by those words and Sebastian's confidence, Arturo took a deep breath. "All right, let's try." Carefully, Sebastian helped him cross stone by stone, ensuring every step was steady. The current was strong, but together they managed to reach the other side. Once on the opposite bank, Arturo collapsed onto a rock, exhausted but smiling. Marta always said that great rewards come from great challenges, he said with a spark of pride in his eyes. Sebastian nodded, looking toward the path ahead. Monte Esperanza remained a challenge, but they both knew they were closer than ever. The base of Monte Esperanza loomed before them like an imposing giant. From where they stood, the summit seemed to touch the clouds, shrouded in a mist that gave it a mystical air. Arturo paused to take in the sight, leaning on his cane, while his heavy breathing marked the toll of the past days. Sebastian, beside him, noticed the fatigue in every one of the old man's movements. "Mr. Arturo, perhaps we should rest here before continuing," Sebastian suggested cautiously. "The summit is still far, and you need to regain your strength." Arturo shook his head. Although his body felt as heavy as a ton, his spirit was resolute. "No, son, Marta wouldn't have waited. I didn't come this far to stop halfway, just a little more." Sebastian knew arguing would be pointless. The resolve in Arturo's eyes was the same he had seen when they decided to cross the river, so he adjusted the straps of his backpack and prepared to support him. "All right, but promise me that if you feel anything unusual, you'll tell me immediately." The path to the summit was steeper than they had expected. Every step demanded an effort that wore Arturo down further. Breaks to catch his breath became frequent, and although he tried to hide it, Sebastian could see how his legs trembled with each movement. At one point, Arturo stumbled, but Sebastian caught him before he could fall completely. "You can't go on like this, Mr. Arturo. I don't want you to get hurt," he insisted. "Sebastian," Arturo replied, his voice firm but laden with emotion. "Marta is here with me. I can't stop now. Each step brings me closer to her, closer to fulfilling our promise. I'll do it, even if it's the last thing I do." They continued, and the trail led them to a clearing where a small wooden cabin stood, old but surprisingly intact. Arturo recognized it instantly. "That cabin. Marta and I always wanted to stop here. She said it was the perfect place to write, to leave traces of who we were." The door was ajar, and as they entered, a smell of wood and thyme enveloped them. Inside, the rudimentary furniture was covered in dust, but everything remained in its place. On the table, Sebastian noticed a small notebook with the familiar slanted handwriting. Marta had been there. Arturo picked up the notebook with trembling hands and opened it. On the first page there was a brief note. "For when you reach here, Arturo, I knew you would." Tears filled the old man's eyes as he read. It was as if Marta had been waiting for him all along, leaving messages to guide him. As they explored the cabin, they found more notes hidden in unexpected places, behind an old mirror, in a drawer filled with rusty utensils, even inside an empty jar. Each message seemed carefully crafted to inspire him. "Remember, we always walk together, even when you're alone," read one. Another, shorter, simply encouraged him, "Keep going. The summit awaits." Sebastian watched silently as Arturo immersed himself in the memories, his face illuminated by a mixture of sadness and hope. When they finished exploring the cabin, the old man sat in a rickety chair and gazed out the window. "You know, Sebastian, this isn't just a journey for me. It's a conversation. Marta is speaking to me, and I'm responding." The young man nodded, deeply moved. "Then let's continue the conversation, Mr. Arturo. The summit is closer than you think." As they left the cabin, the air felt lighter, as if the weight of the past had eased a little. Arturo, though exhausted, had renewed energy. Marta had given him exactly what he needed, a reason to take the next steps and the certainty that he had never truly been alone. The air grew thinner as they climbed the final stretches of Monte Esperanza. The summit was so close they could make out the jagged rocks crowning the peak, silhouetted against the gray sky. But each step Arturo took seemed harder than the last. His breathing was labored. His legs trembled under the weight of years and accumulated effort, yet his gaze remained fixed on his destination. Sebastian, walking beside him, watched the old man's every move with growing concern. "Mr. Arturo, we're very close. Maybe we should rest for a moment," he suggested, but Arturo only shook his head, pressing his lips together in stubborn determination. "If I stop now, I don't know if I'll be able to get back up," Arturo replied between gasps. His voice carried a mix of desperation and resolve that left Sebastian speechless. Then it happened. Just a few meters from the summit, Arturo's body gave out. His knees buckled and he fell sideways, hitting the rocky ground. Sebastian rushed to catch him before he rolled further down. The old man was breathing heavily, his face etched with extreme fatigue. Tears began to stream down his cheeks. "I can't. Marta, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," Arturo murmured, his voice breaking with exhaustion and sadness. The cane that had accompanied him all this way lay on the ground beside him, a symbol of his defeat. Sebastian knelt beside him, gripping his hand tightly. "Mr. Arturo, don't say that. Look at me." Arturo lifted his gaze, his tear-filled eyes meeting Sebastian's. The young man spoke with an intensity he hadn't shown before. "Marta left you more than a destination. She left you a purpose. You've made it this far because you have something to learn, something to fulfill. Don't give up now. Remember what she wrote. You will know what it means to live fully. You're about to find out." Arturo closed his eyes for a moment, letting the words sink in. His mind returned to the moments he had shared with Marta, the laughter, the promises, the dreams. He remembered her smile, her soft voice when she spoke of this place. The summit isn't just a place, Arturo. It's who we are when we get there. With an effort that seemed impossible, Arturo squeezed Sebastian's hand. "Help me. Just one more step." Sebastian carefully lifted him, bearing much of the old man's weight as he helped him to his feet. Arturo took the cane with trembling hands and, leaning on Sebastian, took one step, then another. His body seemed on the verge of collapse, but his spirit burned with renewed strength. Each step was a victory, a declaration that he would not stop. Finally, they reached the summit. Arturo dropped to his knees on the cold rock, his eyes filled with tears as he gazed at the vast horizon stretching out before him. The landscape seemed infinite, a sea of mountains and clouds meeting at the edge of the world, and there, in that moment, Arturo understood. Fulfillment wasn't just in the destination, but in every step that had brought him here, in every memory he had shared with Marta, and in every heartbeat that had driven him to continue. "Marta," he whispered, his voice breaking but full of gratitude. "We did it." The summit of Monte Esperanza was everything Arturo and Marta had imagined. The wind blew strongly, carrying the murmur of the mountains and the echo of a majestic silence. Arturo, still on his knees, felt the sunlight, which had begun to filter through the clouds, bathe him in a comforting warmth. Sebastian, standing beside him, watched in silence, respecting the moment he knew was unique. As Arturo caught his breath, his gaze was drawn to something peculiar. A small mound of stones rested at the center of the summit, like a solitary altar. Something about its shape seemed too perfect to be natural. With growing curiosity, Arturo stood with Sebastian's help and slowly approached it. His hands, still trembling from the effort, began to carefully move the stones. The first layer came away easily, revealing a wooden surface worn by time. A box. Arturo stopped, his heart pounding. This can't be," he murmured. Sebastian leaned next to him. "Do you think it's—" But before he could finish the question, Arturo was already lifting the box with careful hands. He placed it on a nearby rock and opened the lid. Inside, he found a yellowed envelope with his name written in Marta's unmistakable handwriting. Arturo froze, unable to process what he was seeing. Finally, with a lump in his throat, he opened the envelope and pulled out the letter. The ink, though slightly faded, was legible. Marta's voice seemed to come to life as Arturo read softly. "Arturo, if you're reading this, it means we've fulfilled our dream. It means you made it, that you overcame every obstacle, and that you're living fully. It doesn't matter if I'm physically with you. I will always be in your heart, in every step you take, in every moment you remember. To live fully means to honor the moments we shared, and never stop seeking new ones. This is our gift. To know that love transcends everything. I love you now and always." Marta's words resonated through every fiber of his being. Arturo let the letter fall onto his lap as tears streamed freely down his cheeks. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were of gratitude, love, and a profound understanding that filled him with peace. Sebastian, moved, sat beside him. She knew you would make it here. Even after all these years, she believed in you. Arturo nodded, a faint but vibrant smile on his face. He gazed at the horizon as the sky cleared to reveal a seemingly infinite panorama. Marta always saw beyond what was right in front of us. This isn't just a place. It's a reminder that what's truly important is never lost. It's within us, in our decisions, in how we face each day. He carefully tucked the letter into the inner pocket of his coat alongside the notebook. Now I know what it means to live fully, he whispered, as if Marta could hear him. At that moment, the wind seemed to shift, as if offering a silent response that enveloped him. The sunrise began to paint the horizon in warm hues of gold and crimson. Arturo remained seated on a rock near the edge of the summit, holding Marta's letter on, his lap as if it were a priceless treasure. Around him, the world slowly awoke, with the first rays of sunlight illuminating the mountains and dissipating the mist that had accompanied their ascent. For the first time in years, Arturo no longer felt the weight of the emptiness that had accompanied him since Marta's passing. Instead, a deep peace filled every corner of his being. The letter, the journey, the challenges, everything had led to this moment. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply, letting the fresh air fill his lungs and cleanse his soul. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" said Sebastian, approaching and sitting beside him. The young man was also moved by the spectacle of the sunrise and the strength of the connection he had witnessed between Arturo and Marta throughout the journey. "More than I imagined," Arturo replied, without taking his eyes off the horizon. "But it's not just what I see, it's what I feel. Marta is here, Sebastian. Not as a memory, but as part of all this, in the wind, in the light, in me." Sebastian nodded, respecting the depth of Arturo's words. "How do you feel, Mr. Arturo, after everything you've been through, after keeping this promise?" Arturo turned his head toward him and smiled. "I feel like I've closed a chapter. For years, I thought Marta had taken a part of me that I would never get back. But here, in this place we dreamed of together, I realize she never left me. And now I can move forward, not with sadness, but with gratitude." Sebastian observed the old man with admiration. He had learned more in those days of traveling with Arturo than in entire years of his life. "Your story, Mr. Arturo, isn't just yours. It's something that deserves to be shared. If you'll allow me, I'd like to help others know what you and Marta built, what you accomplished." Arturo took a moment to consider his words, then placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. "Thank you, Sebastian. If this journey has taught me anything, it's that stories like this shouldn't stay hidden. I want people to know there's always a reason to keep going, even when everything seems lost." The sun was high in the sky by the time they finally prepared to descend. Before starting the journey back, Arturo turned to the summit one last time. "Thank you, Marta," he murmured, letting the wind carry his words. Then, with a slow but steady step, he began the descent, accompanied by Sebastian, knowing that the story they had lived together was only beginning to be written. The descent from Monte Esperanza began with slow but steady steps. Arturo leaned on his cane with every move, But this time it wasn't due to exhaustion or weakness. It was guided by a renewed sense of purpose. His body, though tired, seemed to move with a lightness that came from something deeper, a peace he had long yearned for. Sebastian, walking beside him, noticed the change. Arturo had a glow in his eyes that he hadn't seen before. Each time the old man spoke, his words carried an energy that belied the fact he had just faced the greatest challenge of his life. Marta always said that dreams aren't just meant to be fulfilled. They're meant to guide us, to show us what truly matters. Arturo said, as they paused for a brief rest. He gazed at the landscape around him with a serene smile. I forgot that for a while. I got stuck in the emptiness, thinking everything was over when she left. But now I know that love and dreams don't die, Sebastian. They just change form. Sebastian nodded, remembering the words of Marta that Arturo had read to him at the summit. You're right, Mr. Arturo. This journey wasn't just about reaching the summit. It was about everything we learned along the way. Arturo looked at him, a spark in his eyes that seemed to defy his age. That's why, Sebastian, when we return, I want us to share this. Not just our story, but what it means to never give up, even when the path seems impossible. People need to remember the importance of dreaming, of loving, and of living fully. Sebastian smiled, excited by the idea. We can do that, Mr. Arturo. Maybe we could gather the people from the town and tell them about Marta and her promise. Perhaps we could even inspire others to seek their own summits, to not let loss hold them back. Arturo nodded slowly, as though Sebastian's words confirmed something he had already decided. Yes, that's what I'll do. Marta would have wanted me to share this, not to talk about us, but to remind everyone that true love is stronger than any mountain. They continued their descent, and although their steps were slow, their spirits were light. Each pause to rest was filled with conversations about the past, about the dreams they still held, and about how they could help others find theirs. As they approached the valley, the sun began to set, painting the sky with warm hues of gold and orange. When they finally spotted the first houses of the village, Arturo stopped and took a deep breath. I'm tired, Sebastian, he admitted with a smile, but I've never felt more alive. You did it, Mr. Arturo, Sebastian replied, placing a hand on the old man's shoulder. And I think we're just getting started. Arturo nodded, his heart full of gratitude. As they walked toward the village, he couldn't help but reflect on all he had gained from this journey. Not just fulfilling a promise, but the certainty that dreams and love always find their way back, even in the darkest moments. In the days that followed, the story of Arturo and Marta began to spread throughout the small coastal town. At first, it was Sebastian who timidly shared details of the journey. Arturo's determination, Marta's messages, and the profound transformation that occurred at the summit of Monte Esperanza. But soon, Arturo himself, with his renewed spirit, decided to tell his story at a community gathering held in the town square. That evening, under a starry sky, Arturo stood before his neighbors, many of whom had known him for decades. With a calm yet firm voice, he recounted every detail of the journey. The challenges, the memories, Marta's words, and, ultimately, the peace he found at the summit. When he finished, the silence that followed wasn't one of indifference, but of deep emotion. Monte Esperanza, once seen as just a distant mountain, began to take on new meaning for the town. Inspired by the story of Arturo and Marta, many young couples and families decided to make the climb, leaving letters on small piles of stones as tributes to the love and dreams they hoped to fulfill. The mountain became a place of connection, not only to memories but also to hopes for the future. Arturo's days became filled with visits and conversations. People came to his home seeking advice or simply to thank him for sharing his experience. He welcomed them warmly, always willing to listen and share the lessons Marta had left him. One afternoon, while Sebastian was helping Arturo plant flowers in the garden, the old man paused and gazed at the horizon. "You know, Sebastian, I've been thinking a lot about what comes next," he said with a calm tone. "After what, Mr. Arturo?" the young man asked, removing his hat to wipe the sweat from his brow. "After this journey, after this life," Arturo replied, looking toward Monte Esperanza. "Marta will be waiting for me, I have no doubt. And when that moment comes, I hope it's with the same peace I felt at the summit. Until then, I'll be here, helping others find their own path." Sebastian smiled, deeply moved. "Mr. Arturo, I think you're already doing that. Your story has changed this town, and it will keep doing so." Over time, Monte Esperanza became a symbol for the community, not just because of Arturo and Marta's story, but because of what it represented. The promise that love and dreams can overcome any obstacle. In the town, they began calling the trail to the summit Marta's Path, in honor of the woman whose hope had inspired so many. Arturo lived the rest of his days in peace, surrounded by friends and neighbors who deeply respected him. Every evening, from his chair by the window, he would gaze toward Monte Esperanza with a serene smile, confident that when his time came, Marta would be waiting for him, arms wide open, beyond the stars.